I'm Jacob Birmingham, animation producer at LaCroix Studios. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create accessible tables. Tables are a great way to organize data by presenting rows and columns of related information. They're also easy for screen readers to navigate if you follow some basic guidelines for making them accessible. And, in many cases, following those guidelines is going to make your tables easier for everyone to read. Let's start by looking at some example tables to see how formatting choices can make them easier or harder to navigate. In these two tables, the information provided is the same. The differences are in the way the tables are set up. Take a minute and identify some differences you see that could make one table easier to read than the other. Ready? Let's do the big reveal. Let's start by just looking at the table on the right. One thing that makes this table more accessible is its simple, consistent structure. The rows go all the way across, the columns go all the way down, and there are the same number of rows and columns throughout the table. This table also has a header row, which I've shaded in light blue. The header row clearly states what type of information is in each column so that readers don't have to guess how the table is organized. This is especially helpful for screen reader users. Now we could put a header row on the table on the left, like the one I've added and shaded in light gray. But the problem is that it won't have the same functionality because the merged cells, the test and projects rows, run all the way across the table. The table on the left also has split cells. The information about the group project at the bottom right helps create an inconsistent number of rows and columns in the table, which undermines the usefulness of a header row and makes the table harder to skim for information. For anyone, it can take a little extra time to figure out how to read a table like the one on the left. But merged and split cells, and especially tables inside of tables, will really throw off screen readers. The cells may be read out of order, and ultimately your table can be difficult, or maybe even impossible, to understand. Let me give you an example of what it sounds like when a screen reader encounters a table that isn't accessible versus a table that is accessible. Here is the JAWS screen reader reading a table that isn't accessible. Listen to how the table announces merged cells in the table, such as tests or the group project due dates.
Table 1, non-uniform table assignment, point value, due date, row 2, tests, row 3, test 1, 100 points, February 21st, test 2, 100 points, April 4th. Projects, project 1, 100 points, January 31st, project 2, 150 points, March 14th, group project, 200 points, draft: April 18th, 50 points, final: May 2nd, 150 points.
In contrast, here is the JAWS screen reader reading a table that is accessible. Notice how all content in the table is read left to right, and it is easier to understand the content contained in each column.
Heading Level 2 Good Table Assignment, point value, due date, project 1, 100 points, January 31st, test 1, 100 points, February 21st, project 2, 150 points, March 14th, test 2, 100 points, April 4th. Group project left parent draft right parent 50 points, April 18th. Group project left parent final right parent 150 points, May 2nd.
As you could hear, the header row explained the content in each column, which made that second table much easier to read and understand. Before we move into the technical tutorials, let's quickly recap what we've learned about creating accessible tables. First, you should use a simple table structure that has the same number of rows and columns throughout. That means avoiding split or merged cells and tables inside of tables. Any of those elements could make it more time-consuming for anyone to figure out how to read the table, but they're especially problematic for screen readers. Next, you need to include a header row that states what kind of information is in each column. Adding that information helps everyone since it takes the guesswork out of your table organization. And it especially helps screen readers navigate your content. There's also a guideline we haven't talked about yet, but which is important for making a table accessible to screen readers. You should add alt text to your table to very briefly summarize the content of the table. The alt text usually isn't visible on the page. but a screen reader will read it out loud so that the user can decide if they want to listen to the entire table. I know some of those guidelines might seem a little abstract at first, so let's look at Microsoft Office to see how you can put all of these guidelines into action when creating a table. In this example, we'll be looking specifically at Microsoft Word, but the steps will be similar in PowerPoint as well. Let's start with creating a table. Go to the menu, also called the ribbon, that runs across the top of your document. Click the Insert tab, and then click the Table option. The table options will appear, and you can hover your mouse over the boxes to choose the number of rows and columns you want for your table. Once your table is created, it's time to add a properly formatted header row. The first step is to add text to the first row in your table that describes the contents of each column. This will help everyone who reads your table understand how it's organized. Once you've added text content to the first row, you also need to add a little extra formatting so that a screen reader can recognize that this is a header row. To do that, start by selecting the entire first row of your table. Next, go to the ribbon and look for the Table Tools group. Select the Design tab in that group. With the Design tab selected, you will see Table Style options on the far left side of the ribbon. Make sure the box to the left of the header row is checked. This is a setting that indicates the header row to a screen reader. However, in a Word document, you can also use it to make the header row appear at the top of each page if the table takes up multiple pages, and that will help everyone who reads your content. To repeat the header row across multiple pages, right-click the table and then select Table Properties from the menu. The Table Properties screen will open. Click the Row tab. Then check the box to the left of Repeat as Header Row at the top of each page. Uncheck the box next to Allow Row to break across pages. Click OK to save the edits. The final step in creating an accessible table is adding alternative text to your table to help screen reader users quickly understand the purpose and content of the table. To access the alt text settings, right-click the table and then select Table Properties from the menu. The Table Properties screen will open. Click the Alt Text tab and then use the title and description text boxes to add information about your table. The title text box is optional, but you have to enter a brief description of the table contents into the description text box. This is the alternative text, or alt text. It won't appear on the page to most users, but screen reader users will hear it read aloud before the contents of the table so that they know what the table is about and can decide if they want to listen to it read out cell by cell. Once you're done adding alt text, click OK, and now your accessible table is complete. If you sometimes use G Suite apps like Google Docs and Google Slides rather than Microsoft Office, there are a few things you should know about creating accessible tables in these tools. Most importantly, it isn't currently possible to add header row formatting or alt text to a table in G Suite. Therefore, you may want to download your finished Google Docs as Microsoft Word files and your finished Google Slides presentations as PowerPoint files. To download a G Suite file, click File in the menu. Select Download, and then choose the Microsoft Office file type from the download options. Then you'll be able to add final formatting touches in MS Office. To make your content as accessible as possible within G Suite, keep the following 3 tips in mind. First, stick with short, simple tables that will be easy as possible to navigate with a screen reader. Second, you should still include a visual header row with text summarizing the content of each column, even if you can't also add formatting to mark it as a header row. And third, add a sentence before each table that summarizes the content it contains. This can't fully replace the functionality of alt text, but it serves a similar purpose. And it can also help anyone who reads your content, not just screen reader users. Now let's take a look at how to create accessible tables in eCampus. It's possible to copy and paste a table into eCampus from a document or a web page. But copying the table might also bring along a whole lot of extra code that will cause formatting and accessibility issues. So, it's a good idea to create your tables directly in eCampus when possible. To do that, just place your cursor in an eCampus text box where you'd like the table to appear. Then select the Insert/Edit Table icon in the text editor menu. A new window will open with settings options for the table. In the General tab, which will be open by default, enter the number of columns and rows you want your table to have. Then go to the Advanced tab to add a title and alt text to the table. Use the ID text box to enter a title for your table. In the summary text box, enter a brief description of the table contents. That would be the alt text. Then click Insert to create the table. If you have an existing eCampus table and you need to add alt text to it, you can access the same settings I just described by putting your cursor anywhere in the table and then clicking the Insert/Edit Table icon in the text editor menu. The Table Settings window will open. Choose the Advanced tab to add a table title and description, and then click Update to save your changes. Once the table is created, you can add a header row. The first step is to add text to the first row in your table to summarize the contents of each column. Next, select the entire header row. Then click Table Row Properties in the text editor. The General tab will open by default. In the Row Type menu, choose Header. Then click Update to save the changes. Now that you've learned the technical steps for a few applications, let's recap the basic guidelines. First, create tables that have a simple, consistent structure. Don't use split or merge cells, and definitely don't put tables inside of tables. Second, make sure you include a header row in both the visual and the formatting sense. And third, add alt text to provide a very brief summary of the table's content. There are also a few accessible table don'ts that you should keep in mind. First, don't use the spacebar or the tab key to create the appearance of a table. There's no way to add alt text or header row formatting to a fake table, and it's also really easy for all the fake rows and columns to get out of alignment, which is annoying for everyone. Second, don't use an image or a screenshot of a table instead of an actual table. A screen reader can easily navigate through the cells of a well-formatted table, but it can't navigate a picture of those cells. Also, as the document owner, you won't be able to edit the information in a picture of a table. And that can be a huge pain if you need to revise the content. Third, remember that the purpose of a table is to present rows and columns of related information. So avoid using tables if the reason for using them is just to force the page layout to look a certain way. Finally, if possible, don't leave blank cells in your table. Blank cells anywhere in the table could also mislead someone using a screen reader into thinking that there's nothing more in the table. But you should especially never leave the top left cell blank, since it's the first cell a screen reader user will encounter. To learn more tips for creating accessible materials, visit DCCCD's full accessibility checklist at dcccd.edu/accessibility checklist. The checklist includes tables, but it also covers 9 other best practices that will help make your materials accessible to people with disabilities and more effective for everyone. And if you'd like, you can also access this PowerPoint online. Just use the short link dcccd.edu/A11Y-15 to access this presentation, as well as all the others in the 15-minute accessibility video series. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for more on accessibility.